All right, guys, I can see we've got about 35 participants logged in. We've got about 400 registrants, so I just want to give it a few seconds before we start. All right, we're at 100. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds. Okay, it looks like we're leveling off, so let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think the topic of conversation today is quite an interesting one. The global equity markets represent a much broader set of opportunities for investors when compared to the JSE. I think we're obviously all familiar with the Magnificent Seven, the broader tech space, the giant consumer good and pharma companies that feature so prominently in many of our offshore portfolios. But today we're discussing a sector that perhaps many of you are less familiar with, and that is the listed American cannabis producers. And without stealing the presenter's Joe Bassett's thunder, it represents what we consider to be a very compelling risk-return equation at this particular point in time. And if you've been watching it over the last couple of years, it's experienced some pretty violent swings in investor sentiment. And over the last kind of 3 years, we've witnessed what I would describe as fervent optimism give way to investor fatigue and almost aggressive capitulation, which I think is an interesting setup for a hedge fund manager like Joe. The current regulatory environment in the USA has basically strangled the economics right out of the commercial players, but this appears to be changing rapidly, and that's essentially why we're here and Joe's here to talk to you today. So by way of introduction, Joe Bassett's been a fund manager with AG Capital, the specialized hedge fund arm of the Anchor Group, for about 15 years now. He runs a strategy that is meaningfully exposed to the cannabis space, and so he's best positioned to take you through what I think is quite an investment opportunity. So Joe, over to you.
Thanks, Henry. Can you see my screen, Henry?
We can.
All right, fantastic. Thank you to everyone who's logged in to watch what I think is just a really spectacular opportunity inside a sector that's, as Henry described pretty well, been completely beaten down and has had just extreme up and downs. I'm going to just start by jumping into why now is the time, why we feel like we're so close to a change in the cannabis space. We can go through 2 million reasons of why we could be bullish on this space at the moment. Today, I'm mostly going to focus around what we feel like is we're right on the cusp of the rescheduling of cannabis in the landscape of the CSA. And the way that it's looked at from the DEA. So jumping into just certain issues and certain catalysts that are out there right now, one of the things that's started to happen in the US, and in the US you have federal restrictions about cannabis. So state by state, you're able to sell cannabis in various forms. Currently, because of the federal illegality of cannabis, you're not able to accept any credit card payments, debit card facilities, anything. Basically, you're dealing completely in cash. So the first issue here is that you're starting to see a massive increase in cash heists at a lot of these facilities, a lot of these retail shops. So it's very much becoming like a sort of South African situation where, convenience stores and things of that nature, places that take lots of cash, are starting to get, hit. New York State, I believe, had 5 just last month. When you consider that in the fact of being a first world country, this is quite a significant uptick in that sort of crime, and people are starting to get hurt. There was a gentleman that was shot and killed recently in the back of one of these heists, and so that this is it's a pending sort of urgency to a reason why this is going to be pushed forward. The second thing is, and we'll touch on this a lot throughout, is that the HHS, both the HHS and the FDA, so HHS is the Human and Health Services, and the FDA, obviously the Federal Drug Administration, have both made recommendations to the DEA to reschedule cannabis from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug. Now, the reason why that's so important is because in the history of all HHS recommendations, there's never been a recommendation made by the HHS that wasn't taken and changed by the DEA. So as of up to this point, we have 100% track record of every recommendation that the HHS has made to the DEA. The DEA has then changed the scheduling for that drug. So the fact that that was made in August of last year, and the DEA is currently doing its own review, for me, it just means that it's a really a matter of time. Adding the FDA coming in is just more fuel in the fire for this rescheduling to take place. The next thing is from the current administration inside the White House. They are, especially in the last 2 weeks, even really starting to jump on the bandwagon of trying to push, cannabis change. I mean, so much so that they've actually made statements, untrue statements, saying that they've already made these changes. So either one, they're completely lying to the public, or two, they're just kind of getting ahead of the rhetoric and just trying to get more PR out of the change that is indeed coming. The next point I'll make is that, as everyone's seen the polls in the upcoming election in the US, you're sort of 6-7 months away from the election, and Biden's horribly behind in the polls. This has been a long-standing campaign promise by their administration, which they just haven't delivered on. Originally, they were trying to, go a different route, and we were trying to pass safe banking, which would have allowed some of these things to happen specifically for cannabis companies. And instead, it looks like they've managed to get some traction with HHS and making this recommendation to the DA and kind of coming in the back door to try to do it that way. So there are lots of reasons, and there really feels like there's real momentum building in this sector right now to finally get us over the hurdle and change the rescheduling. And I'm just going to show you the current DEA scheduling to show you how ridiculous this scheduling cannabis is. As you can see, the Schedule 1 is the most extreme scheduling. Schedule 1 is effectively drugs or chemical substances that currently have no medical benefit. They are highly addictive. They have the consistency of altering people's mental state, etc. Obviously, heroin and LSD are on a completely different scenario than cannabis. But I think what's important here is to look at right now they're scheduling cannabis at a more extreme than they are cocaine and meth, which is completely insane. Methamphetamines have killed close to 200,000 Americans in the last year. It's one of the top 3 leading causes of death, I believe, in the last year in the States. I'm not sure what the number is for cannabis, but I'm pretty sure that it's probably 100x lower. but obviously it doesn't fit this profile, you know, from a standpoint of where it should be. And I think the important thing is that in Schedule 3 is that you need to be able to present a health benefit, okay, in terms of to get down to Schedule 3. The reason why I think that cannabis is able to get to that point is that you have so many cases, so many studies that have come out in the last several years showing that, as an example, people with PTSD, they're getting more relief from anxiety and from certain symptoms than they are from any other pharmaceutical drugs, but with 85% less side effects. The FDA, not only did they make a change in recommendation recently, but as recently as 2 weeks ago, they came out and said that there are, and their studies show that there are in fact health benefits provided to people by use of cannabis, which completely opens the door to change to Schedule 3. So that's what we think is in fact coming. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of other reasons why you know, cannabis is a great long. I really want to focus about you know, the shift into rescheduling. But what is indeed happening is we're starting to see a shift in consumers. As an example, the January has a tendency to be a poor month on a relative basis for alcohol producers and you know, beer and wine and liquor sales. Obviously the dry January, everybody's all motivated and they get back into the gym and they work out and that sort of thing. But what's super interesting is how this year in particular, you've seen that drop in beer sales, and at the same time, you've seen an increase in cannabis sales. And I think that it says a lot about the shift in consumer preference, but I think it also says a lot about a shift in perception. And I'll just go down the line. So I was having this conversation a few days ago, saying, you know, that I was going to do this presentation on cannabis, and you know, a couple of family members sort of around the table as I brought it up. And you listen to them and their thoughts around cannabis. It's very far from, I think, what actual reality is. And we've been sold, and I was sold as a kid, you know, cannabis is a gateway drug and it's, you know, really horrible and alters the mind. You know, there are some downsides to cannabis as well, but it's been completely mispackaged and misrepresented and missold over time. And I think that consumer perception is finally starting to change now, and we're in the early innings of that, in my opinion. From a pricing standpoint, in terms of stock valuations, I've put some comparisons up here simply to tobacco producers because I think it's the easiest comparison. And again, I do not want to get stuck in the mud about talking about purely on valuation, because this is not this is an added benefit, but it's not the reason why I'm so bullish on cannabis. As you can see, you know, you're cheaper than significantly cheaper, about half the price to sales of most of the big board listed tobacco producers, and at the same time with significantly lower growth rates. You know, you're basically looking at a 5-year growth trajectory, and you can go 5 years backward. In fact, on all of these tobacco companies, and there's been no top line growth. And little to no bottom line growth. This has really just been a flat sector. Obviously, they're producing, you know, good cash flows and things of that nature, but this has been a no growth industry for several years now, holistically, and going to be for the next 5 years. You know, the average projection of the U.S. MSO multi-state operators in the States is for somewhere between 8 to 12% revenue growth over the next 5 years, and that likely will even continue on a little bit longer. That's top line growth. as we get further into this, I'm going to show you why bottom line growth is going to be so explosive. So they're already cheaper on a sales basis, dramatically cheaper. But when you look at the growth profile, you can really see how these things can unlock potential as the descheduling rolls off. And as I'm going to show you in a minute, some of the further added benefits to profitability. One other point I'll just make while we're up on this slide is that descheduling is likely going to open up acquisition territory for these exact companies you see at the top of the page here. These companies would have the ability to make acquisitions in cannabis producers from day one of a descheduling. Currently, they can't own them. And I think that there likely will be a couple acquisitions as soon as descheduling occurs. Right. So the next part, and this is part of the unlock and value and the bottom line that we were just talking about, is that currently, because cannabis is federally illegal in the U.S., it falls under the Section 26 280E tax code of the IRS. Now, essentially what that does is it prevents them from being able to have any of the benefits that a traditional business does. So you can't write off any business expenses, you can't depreciate assets, you can't do any of the traditional financial engineering, so to speak, that you can with a traditional business. So the effective tax rate of many of these, most of these cannabis companies is around about 70%, which is absolutely insane. And in some cases, as much as 3x higher than what their effective tax rate would be if they didn't have Section 280E. So obviously, a descheduling of the drug changes that. And you can see here, this is just a projection from Viridian Capital Advisors, but there have been several different analysts that have put out very similar projections from a standpoint of what happens to free cash flow. And I'll just give you an example from a standpoint. If you look at a company like Trulieve, which is barely positive free cash flow, they're running at about $25 million a year in free cash flow. That free cash flow suddenly jumps to just short of $150 million a year. That's 10% of their market cap, the increase in free cash flow. So you want to talk about upside potential, there it is right there. I mean, that is just a spectacular shift. And what I will mention as well is that the cannabis companies themselves are already looking past this. And cannabis in Trulieve's most recent filing, the company announced that they've actually claimed a $143 million tax refund from the IRS going back for the last several years in anticipation of 280E rolling away. And they want to have that claim in there so that when 280E rolls away, that it becomes more likely to be fulfilled. And from many of the this is not a matter that I'm particularly familiar with, but from experts and the lawyers that I have seen that have made comments in many of the publications over the past 2 or 3 months, I think that there's a very high likelihood that they do in fact get that refund when Section 280E is rolled away. So this is very exciting. I mean, again, you're talking about not only a shift in 10% of the market cap of free cash flow, they're going to get 10% of cash in the door potentially. Also, just as a bullet, one shot if they get a tax refund on the back of a change in scheduling. So again, super exciting. A lot of potential upside from this change. Also what I think is really important here, this isn't a sector that's hugely anticipated a descheduling and price this in. Many times you see in markets, stocks and sectors will run ahead of these anticipated changes. Cannabis absolutely has not. I mean, we're down I think sector-wide, well over 75% on average from the peaks in 2021. Some of the names are still down, 85%. Some names are down 75% from the top. But, most of these stocks are at least 5x to get back to all-time highs, and some of them are as much as 10x. And I think with the rescheduling, honestly, I think that 5x is a base case for me, which is one of the best risk-reward profiles of any sector that I can remember in my career. I think what's also important to note is that one of the reasons why these stocks haven't been able to run ahead and sort of chase into some of this momentum that it's had is likely because of the fact that people can't invest in them. And I'm going to touch a little bit more on why that is later in the presentation. So we talk about that momentum. It was in August of last year. We had the HHS made the change in recommendation to the DEA. Then you had the FDA comes out in January and saying that they also believe that they should make a change in rescheduling. Then you've had more recently in the last couple of weeks, you've had 3 new co-sponsors of the safe banking bill. Again, I'm not wanting to focus too much outside of the descheduling, but safe banking is another way to get us past a lot of these hurdles. And all of a sudden, this is becoming a bipartisan issue. You've got a lot of Republicans that are signing on. And so there's just momentum all over the place. And now the FDA has even come with its own set of studies showing health benefits. So we're really progressing nicely down that line. And I think what's important not to shortchange here is actually the global momentum from a standpoint of, one of the reasons why it's so difficult to get the likes of, change policy is because, think about it. If you've got a completely different drug policy to Europe, if the US has a completely different drug policy to Europe, you've got hundreds of flights going back and forth every day. You've got ships, you've got all sorts of things going on. It becomes very difficult to police, and you have to set up all sorts of different standards in order to be able to monitor for something that's legal over here and something that's illegal over there. As you can see, literally this week, we finally legalized cannabis in Germany, which is a huge step from this sort of global drive. And then more recently, you've had over 60 countries that have signed off on looking at changing the international drug policy and the sort of war on drugs and how certain of those drugs, cannabis being one of them, needs to be removed so that they can refine and they can really focus their efforts on what is impacting things and what matters. And I'll step back to the scheduling with the likes of methamphetamine. I mean, these guys need to be focused on getting rid of and eradicating meth. They don't need to be chasing down people that are trying to get anxiety relief or sleep better or things of that nature, or having pain relief from cannabis. They're not in the same ballpark, and we can't continue to act like they are. So there's really a lot of momentum on the global side of things to help enact that, which, like I said, is going to make it way easier for the US to make this change in scheduling. Just from a timeline standpoint, I just wanted to lay out a couple things more clearly. And I posted, I put these last few slides up specifically because, to go back to really what my first slide is, and the need for this to happen from a standpoint of the current administration. I actually don't see a path to victory for the current administration in the US without them changing this. This was one of their biggest campaign promises. You can go back to March 15th here, where Kamala's and Joe Biden are both making bold statements about where things are going. Kamala had made a speech with the rapper Fat Joe, about cannabis and reform. I mean, they're pulling out all the stops here. So far as you've got the Treasury Secretary making comments and saying that they're prepared to do more from a banking standpoint to open facilities and things like that for cannabis. So it's really starting to spread through the entire administration. They're making a hard drive. My expectation, honestly, is one of two things. If they announce rescheduling, likely to either be 420, because I think this administration likes to look cool and hip, and obviously the 420 connotation would carry a lot of weight from that standpoint, or it's likely to drift on a little bit closer to election time, so that they can really have it as a fresh, feel-good story for a lot of what their voter base actually is. Right. So this is actually what I think is probably the most important slide that's on here. And I'm going to run through what it looks like in the underbelly of operating in a U.S. listed cannabis company in the it's not a U.S. listed cannabis company. They're U.S. operating cannabis companies that have to list in Canada, because they're not allowed to list on U.S. exchanges because it's federally illegal. They can't list on U.S. exchanges, right? So I'm going to go through the rung of all of these things. First, a change in rescheduling is going to dramatically reduce costs. Let me start by saying this. Every single employee inside of any of these cannabis companies, because it's a Schedule I drug, cannot have even a blip on their background check. You can't have a misdemeanor. You can't have had a DUI. You can't. There's absolutely. You have to have a perfectly clean record to sweep the floors inside of a cannabis facility in the States right now, which dramatically reduces the ability to hire certain people. Secondly, because it's a Schedule I drug, anyone who's touching or handling anything to do with a drug has to have background checks. They have to have psych evaluations. They have to have, many of them have to go through specialized classes and training in order to even be able to touch the product, and you can imagine the costs associated with going into that. And I'll give you an example. And from what I was told by someone inside of one of these companies that operates in the state of Florida, they have 2 production facilities in the state of Florida and over 75 retail centers. So from their production facilities, which are an average of almost 3-hour drives away from their average retail center, the person who drives the Sprinter van effectively that delivers this product has to have special licensing to be able to handle the product. They have to go through background checks. I think they have to psych evaluations, all these things of that nature. They're paying them like $45 an hour to drive a Sprinter van, but it's not just one guy in the van. They have to, by law, have 2 people in that van. So you're talking about $90 an hour to have somebody drive a van for almost 3 hours to delivery facility, and then just drive an empty van back another 3 hours to delivery facility to over 75 retail locations. I mean, I should have done the math and actually put that on here, because that number would be insane. But these are the sort of costs that are associated right now because of the fact that it's a Schedule I drug instead of a Schedule III drug. The Schedule III drug goes away and you're paying a guy $17 an hour to have one guy in a Sprinter van with GPS tracking on it, and you can watch him as he drives. I mean, it's a completely different game. There's so many different parts of this. Perfect example as well is that right now, we talk about acceptance of credit and debit cards. Right now, that's pretty much a completely cash business. I think it's either cash or money orders. Who pays with a money order? Obviously, you're walking in the door with cash in order to buy your cannabis products. So right now, there are no federally insured. So if you're familiar with the term FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, that is the backbone of the federal government, which insures the deposits of to up to, I believe it's $250,000 per depositor in every federally backed U.S. bank. Almost every bank in the U.S. is a member of the FDIC, because otherwise people don't want to deposit money with them. They cannot use a bank that's FDIC backed. So they have to use a state credit union. So as an example, this same company operates with one bank that's down in Central Florida. And every single time that they need to take that they want to deposit their money, they have to physically take the cash from these cash trucks, and they have to drive it all the way to this one state credit union that will take their deposits. This is how crazy it is. Again, falls away immediately. All of that to and fro, all the risk of security to secure all the cash that you're taking on in location, some of that falls away. The amount of you won't have any distance of transporting that cash, because you'll go to one of the banks down the road to deposit whatever cash you do have, and mostly you'll probably be taking in debit orders. So you probably stack the cash up for a 2-week period before you even take it in. You're able to take credit cards and debit card payments, which obviously dramatically opens payment profiles. Imagine how many people are driving on the way to the shop. They're going to realize they don't have enough cash, but they've got to get to another appointment. They actually don't even get in there to buy product because they don't have time to stop at the ATM and draw cash. It's just an unbelievably different profile. Changing in scheduling, it's going to allow them to deliver product directly to consumers. I mean, who hasn't seen how big of a difference, Uber Eats and DoorDash and things like that have made in everyone's life? I mean, how many of the people watching this presentation right now are getting food delivered to their home 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Now you're probably getting 3 meals a week brought to you. What do you think is going to happen from a cannabis standpoint? Same thing. They're going to be able to put a guy on a motorbike or a car and deliver cannabis directly to your door. These are game changers, absolute game changers to it. And all of these things that I listed and mentioned, not only are they obviously hugely important to the top line, but even more so to the bottom line. But that's not even the most exciting part about this. The most exciting part, in my opinion, about this, and I've been in markets for getting close to 20 years now, is that function of markets change that is going to happen the moment that you allow these companies to list on U.S. main big board exchanges. Okay. Right now, as I said, these companies are all listed in Canada because they're not allowed to be listed on U.S. exchanges, and most of them are all of them, almost every single U.S. broker dealer is not allowed to clear cannabis securities. So if you have an account with JP Morgan, if you have an account with Morgan Stanley, if you have an account with Goldman Sachs, I mean, we're talking about the biggest in the world here. You can't hold this stuff. You can't even have an investment in any of your accounts that sit with any of those banks. I was speaking with one of the investment advisors at Anchor last week, and he was talking about he had they were bringing in a client in that had an overseas portfolio and it had cannabis, and they couldn't actually hold the cannabis stocks. This is the biggest issue. So right now, people don't own it actually because they can't own it. You can't own it in your IRA. You can't own it in your 401k. You can't own it. And so now what's going to happen is you've got a $23 billion market cap, which in the grand scheme of things is peanuts. Okay. You're talking about an entire industry with a $23 billion market cap, and you're going to open up the entire US with the ability to now actually invest in these products. And that is the most exciting part of this. We all saw what happened with the Bitcoin ETFs in listings. What was that? 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago? I mean, there was a bit of an initial sell the news after they listed for 3 or 4 days, and then we rallied 50 or 60% to new all-time highs. And that's $1 trillion market cap of Bitcoin. $1 trillion market cap. This is 23 billion. It's not even it's going to be like a fire hose through a thimble. That you just won't be able to get everybody through the door. And I'll just mention this. I mean, obviously, Bitcoin's got a bit of its sort of it certainly has its diehard following. It's got people who are they're utter believers. I'm sure every single person that's on this call right now probably knows somebody who's the same way about cannabis. They just can't invest in it. So right now it is an extremely exciting situation. For my fund specifically, I had to go and open a second account with another prime broker underneath my fund umbrella in order to facilitate the transaction of being able to purchase these cannabis companies in Canada. So this is something that I think is just underappreciated. I don't think that people are appreciating the functions of markets, but this is hitting from all avenues. It's hitting top line, it's hitting bottom line, and it's hitting that exceptional functions of markets trade, which I think is what's so exciting about this. And so I'll just finish off here with what I think are the possibility of outcomes. Obviously, if the DEA chooses not to take the HHS's recommendation and the FDA's recommendation, and not which they've never done before, but if they choose not to for some reason, and they don't reschedule, it's a negative outcome. The stocks will go down. How much they'll go down? They'll go down significantly, but I'm not so sure that they'll take out lows, because a lot of these businesses are starting to start to see reacceleration and top line growth. They're through a lot of their hyper spending phases and things of that nature, and you're seeing consolidation in the industry. So, I'm talking about 5 to 10x on the upside relative to what I see on the downsides, potentially, maybe 30% on the downside, which is a pretty spectacular risk reward skew. I do not see a non-reschedule as the most likely outcome. In fact, I see that as the least likely outcome. But obviously, we have to look at all possibilities. The second one I'll look at, we'll talk about is them fully legalizing and just descheduling marijuana. I don't see that as the case. I think, one, it's too big of a jump, and also it's just it wouldn't make sense to completely descheduleize marijuana. I don't think that they're ready to do that. That would make it too accessible to minors and things of that nature, and I just don't see that happening. And what I think is actually the most likely outcome is what we've been kind of just going on about the entire time, and that's a rescheduling without federal legalization. That is, in my opinion, the absolute best outcome. And that is the outcome that's the most upside. And the reason why is because if we go back to option number 2, it opens the door immediately for new competitors into the market. It will open to a bigger market, but it opens the door to a lot more competition straight out the gates. And in scenario 3, which is, like I said, I think the most likely outcome and the best outcome, it is right now is very difficult to get licenses in state. Most licenses have been given away in all the states that have had legal cannabis for more than 3 or 4 years. They're expensive. It's hard to get scale. And it's just the industry is consolidated into really 4 or 5 major players from what were probably 7 or 8 only a year and a half ago. So I think the last option not only is the most likely, but I think it's the best outcome for the companies that we've listed here in the presentation today. So and that's all we've got for today, guys. If you are interested, I think the best avenue is to contact your wealth manager with Anchor and go through them on how you could potentially invest. And I'll open it up for some questions.
Thanks, Joe. I think, yeah, just to add to that, I think cannabis space is a fluid one, given all of the regulatory change taking place. So yeah, while it really depends on how you're invested with us as to how we could access that opportunity for you, but I think it's the type of investment that's suited to an active mandate, like a hedge fund, like your hedge fund, for example, where you can trade around the opportunity actively. So just for the benefit of the attendees, Joe does manage a hedge fund which is materially exposed to the theme. And if you'd like more information on that fund, please do get a hold of your anchor wealth manager, and we can guide you on how to access that opportunity. So I'm having a look at the Q&A, but I've got a couple that I've got to ask as well. Joe, so the obvious question for me is, what does big tobacco think about this? And you kind of touched on it. I mean, the tobacco stocks have been a big feature in our client portfolios for decades now. They're big index weights, but these are businesses who are struggling with negative volume growth. You look at the big operators, they're scrambling to innovate new categories. Look at what's happened with the vaping craze, and look how that vaping space consolidated. How do they respond to the growth of the cannabis space? Do they acquire these guys? You said they might. Do they compete with them? I mean, what's the play there?
Yeah, I don't see how they don't just acquire them. I mean, when you look at if they don't acquire them, they just take material stakes in them. And the reason why I say that is because obviously the big tobacco companies, they've got deep pockets and the ability to get in the market and compete. It's just going to take them so long. That in order to create these production facilities and distribution networks and things of that nature, it's going to be completely different from what they're doing on the tobacco side. And when you consider the relative the cost for them to acquire relative to their the market caps, I mean, these guys could, you're talking about $100+ billion companies making acquisitions that would be in the $3-4-5 billion range. It just seems like it would be dramatically easier for them to try to acquire someone and then just help capitalize them and things of that nature. And I never even touched on that in the presentation. And like I said, I could talk for hours about the differences and things of that nature. These guys don't have access to traditional capital markets. They have to go to Canada to raise funds, and they're issuing bonds at 11 and 12%, which they should be able to issue in the States at 6%. It's just, and so an acquisition from the likes of a Philip Morris or someone of that nature, it just opens the door to obviously the cheaper financing and economies of scale and things of that nature, distribution networks. There's just so many positives and cross synergies that I think that's a very likely outcome. Honestly, I think if we had descheduling, I could see an acquisition in the first month, honestly.
And that's interesting. So, I mean, if you look at things like psilocybin and peyote, I mean, these are kind of also more trendy alternative medicines, but we haven't seen those sectors formalize in the same way that cannabis has. So what is it about cannabis that's attracted the capital in the way it has?
I mean, I don't know a lot about peyote and things of that nature, but I just think that people have known, everybody that probably 90% of them have used cannabis at some point in their life. People know that it doesn't have the intensity and the same level of side effects that any of these other drugs do. And so I think that there's a level of comfort around it for most people, that it's just easier for them to sort of gravitate to it and attach to the idea. And I think that's what makes this more likely to happen in my mind. I mean, it's a bipartisan issue in the States. It's supported by both sides of the aisle. And when you look at polling in the U.S., it's something like 70%, 73%, I believe, of the U.S. is in favor of legalization, not even just descheduling. So that this is, it's far down the tracks now, and I just don't see that. Some of the psilocybins and things of that nature, maybe they get there, but those are always going to be, I think, more controlled, and we're at least 10 years behind the sort of, the consensus place that we are now with cannabis and those things.
Joe,
Matthew's
what triggers
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
what triggers the change in the tax treatment? Sorry, just cut me off if my internet signal's bad, Henry. I've been having some issues here.
No, you come in through fine.
What triggers the change? What triggers the change in the tax treatment? The descheduling or the actual legalization?
Rescheduling to both. But if you reschedule to schedule 1, it'll I mean to schedule 3, it'll immediately change the tax treatment. So what's a very good part about that question, Pete? So that then the debate then becomes about how they would account for that. You know, I've seen that in fact I read an article yesterday when I was going through some of this stuff. It's specific, one of the top legal advocates in the cannabis space says that they're all going to try to claim from like, okay, it changed today. We're like from this point mid-year, we're going to change tax treatment. He says that they'll all try it, but he doesn't actually think that they're going to get away with that. And he thinks it's going to more, unless it happens in the front half of the year. He says if it happens in the front half of the year, then he thinks they'll manage to get away with it. If it happens in the back half of the year, then he thinks it's just going to be a flat end of year tax treatment changes from beginning of financial year 2025, which is also fine. In my mind, again, it's not so much about that as it's about just the actual event changing and that momentum and unlock that it's going to create.
So is there any signaling beyond what you've kind of indicated, or do we just wake up one morning and some rules being passed? I mean, how does it manifest itself?
There's been so what I mentioned, you know, some of the pressers that the current administration has had in the last couple of weeks. I mean, they literally said that they have legalized marijuana. I mean, that was, I believe, one of the, and I don't know if that's a Freudian slip from Kamala Harris or if you know, she's like us, you know, trying to just build some momentum going into it. So I think there seem to be lots of little clues, and the fact that they keep in recent weeks, even I'm talking about, it just gets more and more frequent from, you know, senators to the White House to, you know, the intensity is just building. So I think that there's so much energy around it at the moment, and I would guess that is going to coincide with this being, you know, on our doorstep. So I've never seen so much momentum from a talk standpoint, but yes, I mean, effectively we're going to wake up one morning and you're going to read the headline and that's it, and that's the game changer.
So let's talk a little bit about how to invest in it. So, you know, you run a fund where you're obviously taking positions. It'd be interesting to hear how you approach it. Do you just take naked long positions or some options, or, you know, what sort of size? And if you had your own portfolio and you wanted to invest in it, are there ETFs or things that you buy that would kind of give you exposure to the story?
Yeah, so there is a US listed ETF that's probably the most accessible product, and that's MSOS. That's really the only way to kind of get, I would say, you know, traditional access to being able to list in the space. But, you know, they've gotten away with it because they've got, you know, water downs and markers of, like, you know, cannabis real estate and things like that they've been able to kind of water it down enough that they're able to get it above board. So it's not as pure play, obviously, as direct exposure to the names. You know, the main names being Curaleaf, Trulieve, Green Thumb, Cresco Labs, Air Wellness, things of that nature. And there are 2 ways to invest in those. You can invest in those in Canada. So access to Canadian markets via, you know, a few different pathways, or US listed pink sheets. And I probably should have detailed this a little bit more, but those same stocks are listed in pink sheets in the US, but in people's IRAs and 401ks and things of that nature, you can't invest in pink sheets, or not in most. So that's the reason why these guys U.S. investors don't really have actual access to these names. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Another interesting one. So Biden's probably going to push it through. What happens if Trump comes back? Does he repeal it again?
Absolutely not. I think Trump is that's not Trump has never made any mention of the such, and I don't. It wouldn't make sense for him to. It's too widely supported across party lines. I just and across just the constituency in the U.S. I honestly don't see that as even a. I don't even see that as a 1% risk. There's just I don't see any chance of that happening.
And then Joe, what one listener is asking, or viewer is asking, just to clarify, these things are listed in Canada, but their main operations are in the US. Is that correct? Just explain the stock market domicile and the business, and just to explain under. So it's federally illegal, but they're allowed to operate in certain states because they've got and can't.
Yes, so that's the whole. I think both one of the great strengths of the U.S. is that the ability for states to make have a very heavy hand in what happens inside of their own state. So it's federally illegal, and anything that touches the federal system. Obviously, cannabis cannot be involved in, hence the traditional banking system and the FDIC. The cannabis can't cross state lines. And that there are other upsides in regards to change in legalization from that standpoint. I'll just give you another example with regards to Trulieve. They've anticipated this, and they've built one of their production facilities in almost on the Georgia-Florida state line. And Florida has the sort of panhandle, and it's wide at the top and then long down to the bottom. So they've put it there strategically because they're very, if you open up legalization or declassify down to Schedule 3, all of a sudden you cross state lines to deliver out of that facility. You don't have to build a South Georgia facility. So they got the one facility that's in North Georgia, and you understand what's that. So there's all sorts of things like that that are going to unlock. But yeah, that's the caveat, is that each state has their own rules. So as an example, the state of Florida, which is one of the better markets, it's medicinal use only. It's medical marijuana. So the only way that you get access to marijuana in the state of Florida is you actually have to get a doctor's note, which are very easy to get these days. You can tell them that you're just nervous about something, and they'll pretty much write you a prescription for medical marijuana. But then you've got states like Colorado and California where it's actually fully legal inside the state. And those states actually aren't nearly as good from a competitive standpoint, but because it's fully legal, there's way more competitors in there, which is what I was kind of going back to, which is if you fully federally legalize it, then all of a sudden you're just opening the door to way more competition. So that's not nearly as bullish of you're opening the door to be able to sell to everyone. But you're not, but you're also going to hit a lot more competition.
Henry, anything more from your side? I see we're hitting up against the time period.
At the time limit. Yeah, Joe, I think just one more question from my side. I mean, outside of cannabis, you're obviously a very active manager. I mean, you run a hedge fund, you've got that flexibility to go long and short. Given the strength in the US equity market over the last while, I mean, just more broadly speaking, how are you positioned? What is your feeling for the market over the next 12 months?
Yeah, so I mean, I should touch a little bit more on the cannabis side. That Pete asked me the question I never really answered, which is, the way that I'm exposed to these names is I hold effectively a basket of about 5 names of the ones that I think have the most torque with potential unlock. As you could see from the slide that I showed earlier, some of them are going to benefit more than others from a change in 280E. There's no listed options on any of the individual names. You can get options on MSOS ETF, but they're incredibly expensive. And I think one of the reasons people are paying up huge for premium in anticipation of a change in rescheduling. So right now, yeah, just long cash equities in those specific names. In terms of the entire portfolio right now, yeah, I see the market as very heavily leaning into tech. I think most of the people that I speak to on a daily basis, have the bulk of their offshore portfolios in tech, or at least that's where they're extremely heavy. And I see a real rotation coming out of some of those names and into other parts of potentially the more industrial economy and traditional businesses and things of that nature as some of the froth rolls off. I mean, there's just a lot of potential warning signs going on right now. I mean, if you're paying attention to the crypto space and a lot of the altcoins, I mean, the coins with the craziest names are the coins that are up 20, 30, 40x in the last 2-3 weeks. It just reminds me so much of the 2021 period before we started to roll over into 2022. A lot of the meme names going. You got Donald Trump's Truth Social rallying 100% in the last 2 days almost, things of that nature. We're getting to that point again and it feels like there's going to be a real rotation coming, and I think it'll come from a lot of the tech names, in my opinion. So this is, for me, I'm in a really special spot right now, which I actually have a lot of things that which I like on the long side, cannabis being one of them. So and if market, if the NASDAQ comes off 10-15%, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever to the cannabis names. So that's one of the reasons why I also like it.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Guys, in the interest of time, I think let's leave it there. There are a couple of questions in the forum which are unanswered, so we'll endeavor to answer those via email to you afterwards. Just as a reminder, if you are interested in Joe's fund, please speak to your Anchor Wealth Manager, and they'll be able to give you more information, and also some more information on accessing the cannabis opportunity via long-only opportunities in your segregated portfolios as well. We'll also be sending out a recording of the session along with the slides. So thanks for dialing in, and we'll see you guys again soon. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, guys.